Veo que ya hay varias personas aquí adentro. Vamos a dar un minutico más mientras que van llegando los otros. Bueno, muy bien. Creo que podemos arrancar. Bienvenidos todos. Bienvenidos a esta conversación profunda de efecto mariposa. En este caso vamos a hablar de cultivar nuestra identidad en este mundo fragmentado. Aquí con Brian Stafford de Animas y Alejandra Balcázar de Efecto Mariposa. Lo primero que voy a hacer es hablarles un poquitico de Efecto Mariposa, un pequeño contexto para introducir esta conversación. Efecto Mariposa es una organización sin ánimo de lucro que provee espacios como para abordar los cambios profundos y la transformación en la cual estamos como retados en este momento, con el ánimo de darle la vuelta como a este paradigma de separación que nos ha desconectado y justamente como entrelazar y ver qué tan entrelazados estamos con el mundo más que humano, y bueno, y sabernos parte de esta tierra. Ojalá vivir en armonía con ella y con todo lo que la conforma, y también dejarnos seducir por los misterios de este mundo, de estar vivos, y también como abordar las preguntas profundas del alma. En Efecto Mariposa tenemos varios espacios creados, un peregrinaje en ciencia holística y vida sustentable de 8 meses que ocurre cada año, cursos de profundización, tenemos varios intensivos que trabajamos con Animas, un área de ecologías del cuidado donde trabajamos con la huerta, el alimento, el cuerpo y los ecosistemas que nos rodean. Y bueno, ya estamos abriendo estos ciclos de conversaciones profundas donde queremos como abordar todos esos temas que nos llaman tanto la atención. Y en este caso vamos a hablar como del trabajo de Animas Valley. Animas Valley es una organización en Estados Unidos, en Colorado, que lleva más de 20 años trabajando en el descenso al alma y en todos los procesos pues como de alma de las personas como para encontrar sus dones al mundo. Llevamos 5 años con ellos trayendo acá sus intensivos, pues compartiendo todas sus enseñanzas, los libros que tienen y como creando nuevos espacios con ellos. Nuestro invitado de hoy es Brian Stafford. Él es es un psiquiatra profesional pues sobre todo del área de la psiquiatría profunda. También es guía en naturaleza, poeta, ensayista y como agente de transformación humana y cultural. Durante mucho tiempo fue académico de pediatría y también como psiquiatra para pues prenatal de niños, de adolescentes, de adultos, y haciendo también investigación clínica en temas también de educación, y bueno, en ese proceso ha ganado varios premios de Estados Unidos. En un momento dado, Brian comenzó a darse cuenta que la cultura occidental tiene poca sabiduría para salvarse a sí misma, y como entender un poco que esta cultura es como patológicamente adolescente, como una enfermedad cultural, como de esa cultura occidental, con un desarraigo de la tierra y con una gran frustración porque el ego no logra ser guiado por el alma. Brian completó su proceso de entrenamiento como guía psicoespiritual en naturaleza en Animas Valley, y ahora guía a individuos al lugar donde más anhelan y a la vez donde temen ir, al lugar y al propósito de su alma. Un momentico por aquí. Aquí una pequeña. Bueno, además de hacerles esta presentación, les tengo unas cosas técnicas. Hay una traducción para los que quieran recibir, pues que quieran oírlo en español. En el menú que tienen abajo dice interpretación, como al lado de los participantes, el chat, compartir pantalla, etcétera. Y hay como un simbolito de un mundo. Y si hacen clic ahí, pueden tener la traducción, pues pueden no escucharlo. Eso, muy bien. Lo pueden escuchar en inglés, pues la voz de Brian y de Aleja, o en español. También todos vamos a estar silenciados y por el chat pueden escribir sus preguntas. Aquí las vamos a procesar y las seleccionamos al final para hacérselas a Brian. Y bueno, como la mayoría sabe de estos temas de Zoom, arriba a la derecha, pueden cambiar entre vista de hablante o vista de galería si quieren ver a todo el mundo. Bueno, eso en cuestiones técnicas. Y bueno, es tradición de Efecto Mariposa cada vez que abrimos un espacio, tocar el gong y hacer como una pequeña relajación para ubicarnos en este espacio y leerles un pequeño poemita. Entonces, para darle inicio a esta conversación, les propongo que arranquemos por ahí, si les parece. Muy bien, entonces pónganse cómodos, ubíquense, pueden estirarse, moverse un poco. Ha sido un largo día. Soltar, relajarse. Ubicarse aquí y ahora. Dejar las tensiones atrás. Respirar profundo. Bueno, y voy a tocar el gong. Y eso, se me mutió. Listo, voy a tocar el gong. Y leemos un poemita especial para esta noche. A Medicine Woman's Prayer. I will not rescue you, for you are not powerless. I will not fix you, for you are not broken. I will not heal you, for I see you in your wholeness. I will walk with you through the darkness as you remember your light. Cherie Bliss Tisley. Bueno, muy bien. Entonces le paso la voz a Brian Stafford y Aleja Balcázar, que nos van a acompañar acá como con unas preguntas, respuestas de todo este tema, de cultivar la integridad en este mundo fragmentado.
Ahora sí, muchas gracias. Buenas noches a todos. Mi nombre es Alejandra Balcázar. Estamos aquí básicamente enfrente de un personaje que es absolutamente fascinante. Brian, it's so good to have you with us here. Good night. La idea aquí en este momento es como empezar a hacer una serie de preguntas sobre qué es ese trabajo que tiene Animas Valley en Colombia y cómo se propone ese entrar en el ser de cada uno de nosotros y trabajar en él para poder conseguir, digamos, como unas vidas más plenas y llenas de sentidos. Entonces voy a ir como straight to the point, como dice el dicho, voy a ir muy directo a las preguntas para aprovechar el tiempo en el que vamos a estar juntos y que Brian pueda entregarnos lo mejor que tiene de sí mismo. Entonces voy de una vez. Estamos en este momento como viviendo esos tiempos muy retadores que creo que todos acá hemos sentido y que hemos vivido y que los prácticamente padecemos últimamente, y nos estamos preguntando seriamente qué es eso que está pasándonos, que lo que creíamos que era ya ha dejado como de ser y lo que habíamos creado como para dar respuestas a esos interrogantes grandes que como humanidad tenemos y como personas tenemos, pues ya no está dándonos más respuestas. Sentimos un poco como un ambiente raro, un cierto desconcierto, como una falta de guía sabia en todos los rincones del planeta. No es un tema solamente colombiano. Tenemos inestabilidades sociales, políticas, económicas, institucionales, y como telón de fondo, como para rematar todo este tema, tenemos como esa tremenda destrucción de los nichos ecológicos de la vida en todo el planeta, hasta un punto en donde sentimos que vamos como empujándola hasta convertirla o estresarla tanto que ya no podríamos vivir en una vida tal y cual como la conocemos. Nos llegan como noticias angustiosas, ¿no? De eso que está como avisorándose como el futuro nuestro, incierto, difícil. Y desde Animas Valley Institute nos llega esta voz que nos dice que antes que seguir actuando, lo que necesitamos es revisitar y trabajar disciplinada y amorosamente en eso de ser, más que hacer, en eso de ser, y realmente ser capaces de transformar como las realidades y nuestra relación con la vida. Nos están como planteando desde Animas Valley una especie como de viaje a la profundidad de nuestros propios seres para encontrar y rescatar eso que nos da sentido, eso que es la esencia de cada uno de nosotros, y cultivar eso para poderlo traer y regalar como esos dones que traemos cada uno únicos, irrepetibles a este mundo, a este lugar que habitamos. Nos dice que eso debe hacerse a través de una radical conexión con la naturaleza, con esa naturaleza de la que somos parte, cultivar eso que en el lenguaje de Animas Valley se llama el wholeness, y que nosotros aquí en español para nuestros propósitos de esta conversación vamos a traducir como la integralidad del ser o la integridad del ser. Entonces comencemos por el principio. Vamos a hacerle la siguiente pregunta a Brian y la voy a hacer en inglés, así es de que podemos ir comenzando a utilizar nuestra traducción. So Brian, could you please tell us what is it that Animas Valley calls to work on your wholeness, and why is it so important nowadays? Good afternoon, good night.
Good evening, good to be with you all, and thanks for showing up this evening. I think maybe it's partly of what you mentioned in kind of your introduction there, is that most of us feel really disconnected, actually. So maybe if we focus first on disconnection, that might help us kind of define wholeness or think about wholeness. Many people feel disconnected from themselves. We have lots of fragmentation and lots of people struggling with depression and trauma and addictions and all kinds of challenges. And then we have people who feel disconnected from each other. Actually, like their relationships are quite challenging wherever they might be. So there's disconnection there. There's disconnection from the natural world for many individuals, that they don't get a sense that I really belong to nature. And my primary place of relationship is in nature. I think that's probably one of the major challenges for our culture right now, especially related to some of the things you talked about ecologically that are happening in the world and have been for quite a long time. And then there's also people feel very disconnected from the mystery or the cosmos, like from the magic of what we've all been dreamt into this world to do and to be and how to live. So it might be something that indigenous people or nature-based people still have a connection with, but for most of us modern people, our institutions, our parenting, our entertainment might serve as a source of disconnection rather than connection to all of these things. Mm-hmm. So wholeness then, if that's disconnection or fragmentation, might be the opposite or the inverse of that, where it's a sense that one feels truly connected to themselves and to their purpose and their developmental purpose, maybe, which is changes, and you might hear about that in the future from Nate Bacon. Truly feels like they understand who they are and what they're doing, and they do it with passion, and they do it with creativity, and they do it with vigor, and that they're in some ways self-directed rather than other-directed. And that's one of the challenges in our culture. Our culture wants us to be directed typically by what we might call a technological industrial growth complex, that wants us to primarily work for them and to consume what they want us to produce, something like that. And wholeness for us in Animas and for many individuals, it's kind of living in a way that we know what we're here to do and we're going to bring that forth in the world. And part of that is, part of our wholeness is understanding our ecological relationship to the watershed or the land that we live on, and how to tend that, how to be sustainable, but also regenerative, how to be in conversation with the land and see what wants to happen there kind of as a co-creation, rather than typically just extracting from the land or seeing it as a place of recreation or entertainment or, I don't know, destruction. And another part of wholeness might also be this greater sense that we're connected to a greater mystery than ourselves. And my understanding comes from my upbringing, if I can share that, of having been reared in a very conservative Christian environment where God was an authority figure that wanted me to obey. I didn't understand really that the earth was good as she is, rather that in some sense it might be dangerous or tainted or something like that. And a lot of aspects of our human wholeness was off limits. Well, that led to me feeling quite fragmented and not quite connected to myself or to others or to mystery or even God, if you want to call it that, and certainly not the earth. So maybe wholeness is that it's related to the word health, actually, in the Latin. And so wholeness and health are definitely related. When something is whole, it's healthy. Just like when an ecosystem is not fragmented, it's whole and healthy. So that might be a way to kind of start off the conversation of what I understand about wholeness. I hope that's helpful.
Suena muy interesante, pues poder como ir viendo esas propiedades de ese wholeness, pero para tener como unas imágenes más claras de eso que estás diciendo, sería importantísimo como para nosotros mirar con esas imágenes tuyas ¿cómo sería una sociedad que habita desde esa integralidad y que está relacionada con su territorio, con su tierra, con su naturaleza? ¿Cómo serían esas formas como de ver y de actuar que serían distintas a las que hoy tenemos si trabajamos desde la integralidad? So Brian, to get a better picture of what you're talking about, how would a society that lives from its wholeness look like? And which of the ways of seeing or of being of us right now would be different?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've not really seen a society that lives from wholeness, actually. And I haven't been to many nature-based cultures or intact indigenous cultures. That would probably be the closest approximation in a certain way of kind of that people that are living in conversation with their land base and with each other and mystery and have developed maybe cultural institutions by which to help people become mature. I think that's one of the challenges here for the question that you've asked, and just in general, like a mature society or a whole society or an ecocentric society has people in multiple stages of development supporting each other become what they're born to do in a certain way. And it doesn't have a whole lot to do with capitalism. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with having a job or an income or vacation or insurance or things like that, although that's what we have in our culture. And so in a culture that's evolved as far as we have and maybe as backwards as we have, I think it's a question of what will it look like in the future. My sense it will have a lot to do with what's already happening right now. We're in this great place of collapse, we might say. Collapse of our institutions, collapse of our ecosystems, collapse of expectations of what life should be or what we had been trained to be, and even collapse of educational paradigms and religious paradigms. So my sense is that people are longing for a different way forward, and for me, that way forward requires kind of a return to our innate original wholeness, as well as returning to our connection to Earth. So that may be some really important places for us to look. It might be a culture that doesn't overuse its ecosystem, per se. That might be part of it. It might be lots of little local groups living again, as it once was. It's probably not having a lot of shipping of global goods and global agricultural around the planet. It's probably like just living from your place again. And when we live from our place, then we know our limits, actually. We're kind of humbled, but we also know how to protect everything. We know how to protect maybe the wildness and the wholeness of children and support the maturation of individuals to become the same kind of way, kind of ecologically minded might be a big part of it as well.
Brian, excelente, ¿no? Eso de imaginarse esa sociedad basada un poco como en estos principios. Tú te formaste en la psiquiatría profunda, y llevas muchos años desde Animas acompañando ese trayecto de las personas que aprenden a cultivar su ser íntegro para vivir pues sus vidas más plenas y poder entregar con sentido aquello que traen como al mundo. Eres una de esas personas que uno diría que conoce realmente la psiquis humana. Y voy a hacer de pronto aquí una suposición un poco atrevida, pero creo que muchos de los que estamos aquí, a quienes de alguna manera conozco en alguna forma, otros que no conozco, pero que imagino que hacen parte como de estas sociedades y nos sentimos, sabes, como que de alguna manera no encajamos del todo en estas sociedades, como que nos golpea la realidad que estamos viviendo, como que quisiéramos entender que hay una manera distinta de habitar el planeta y que pudiéramos un poco cambiar esas realidades. No es como coincidencia tampoco que haya una gran cantidad de personas hoy en día en el mundo deprimidas o con adicciones, como ya tú lo estabas mencionando, con ideas suicidas o con esa pereza de vivir en semejante misterio y semejante privilegio que es la vida. Eso indica que algo no está bien realmente, ¿no? So, Brian, the question would be, are we all sick? Is our society making us sick? should those of us that feel like cannot belong or engage fully from our hearts to our societies go to a psychologist or a psychiatric? What is the idea of healing instead of healing?
Yeah, wonderful question. It's a question I asked a long time ago. It was a question that kind of ended my career as a psychiatrist. I think part of it looking is that most people in our culture feel fragmented or broken or not whole because our culture itself is not that way. And it's hard to survive in our culture unless you kind of buy into what the culture wants from you, which leaves us leaving fragmented and broken. And partly my understanding is that that's not necessarily bad for business for all the global enterprises that are out there. If we were to actually live in our wholeness, we would probably not tolerate what is happening on these different scales from all the corporations in the world. We wouldn't tolerate, we wouldn't participate. We'd find a new way and we'd probably protest and change our governments and change the way we do everything. So maybe to go to your question about that, part of it is maybe our fragmented worldview might be part of it, right? In most nature-based and indigenous society, everything's seen as part of the whole. Actually, everything belongs, even challenges. But maybe beginning with certain types of agriculture and certainly kind of with the scientific revolution, we began to see the world as more parts, as more mechanistic, actually. And then we began to realize that sometimes a mechanistic worldview helps in bringing modern medicine into the world. It's probably not the best approach, though, when you take a look at the human psyche, or you look at the human animal, or the human psychology. Like medicine has succeeded in certain ways because of the design or the understanding that symptoms are associated with pathology and lack of pathology leads to wholeness. When we transfer that to the human psyche, that makes us feel broken in and of itself. So I think partly it's the worldview of Western psychology and psychiatry that these disorders exist entirely, and that people who have symptoms might be on the way to disorder, and the way to disorder is treatment from someone else. I'm not saying that's not true, but that's not the whole game, actually. So there's different perspectives on that. And in my sense is that as a psychiatrist, I helped people function, but I help them function in a dysfunctional culture. And that's not really the point. If you're symptomatic in a dysfunctional culture, you should feel symptomatic in a certain way. But there's a different possibility of not just healing symptoms or healing disorders. There's this whole other concept of cultivating your innate human wholeness, which was totally new to me when I encountered it. I hadn't heard that before. It made intuitive sense, and I wanted some of it, and I wanted to know how to get there. And I think just that paradigm shift that we have our innate human wholeness, and we can even think about it now, if we can say, let us all return to our innate wholeness, there's a shift that happens. When we know that we're possibly whole, there's a shift that happens in our understanding. We don't feel quite so bad about ourselves or look for problems in others.
So interesting. Well, but before, voy a decirlo en español, antes de empezar como a ver cómo es ese trabajo que hace Animas Valley o que propone Animas Valley para trabajar ese cultivar nuestro ser íntegro, pues vale la pena un poco mirar un mapa, ese mapa de la psiquis humana que desarrolló Bill Plotkin para Animas Valley y en el cual un poco se basa todo este trabajo. Es un mapa que representa de alguna manera esos aspectos de ese wholeness, de ese ser íntegro que pretendemos todos los días cultivar y tener mejor para nosotros. Entonces yo invitaría ahorita a Brian a que nos muestre ese mapa y que más o menos podamos como situarnos allí y entender cuáles son todos esos aspectos que hacen parte de nuestro wholeness, de nuestro ser íntegro. So Brian, could you please share with us the map that describes a little bit better those aspects of our wholeness that we are to cultivate consciously, and talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I'll talk a little bit about how the map came to be too. As we all know, when we're lost, what can be helpful is a map, actually, of where we're going. And in Western culture, there haven't been a whole lot of maps about the human psyche. There's been a lot of lists of disorders, like a huge laundry list of disorders. I don't know, maybe 300 or so currently. But we haven't had a map of our innate human wholeness and what that means. It's been a concept that's been foreign to kind of Western psychology and psychiatry. And so what Bill Plotkin began to discover is that when he was guiding these things called vision fasts, kind of achieving a non-ordinary state of consciousness by doing a solo in the wilderness, people had a variety of experiences out there. Some quite profound connection with the earth, some profound with the soul, a lot of self-healing, connection to nature, a lot of healing from trauma and other regrets or griefs from their past and their lineage. But we also learned that some people didn't have such profound experiences because there were parts of themselves that were holding them back from those experiences, or that they didn't have access to certain parts of their psyche. So as Bill and his colleagues at that time, I wasn't with Animas during this time, were kind of tracking what was happening for people on that, they designed particular invitations to help open them further, maybe into their body or into their emotional body, or just to help them be present and centered, or to help them make good decisions, or to help them open further up to their imagination. So a lot of the map just kind of began to develop by seeing what's happening out there and how can we help people have more profound experiences in nature, actually on these vision fasts. And so Bill is kind of a master at understanding how the psyche works, and he's a great person to kind of take bits and pieces from others' learning and kind of put it all together so that it is a comprehensive whole that functions primarily as a map to guiding. It's not like a theory where it's supposed to hold everything. It's more like a map, and it's a place that we can look when we feel a bit of something missing, something like that. So maybe we can pull a map up now, and apologize that it's not in Spanish, and I think they'll probably be translating some of these things. I just wanted to point out here, this map, even though you're looking at it on your screen, could be imagined on a horizon here. And on this horizon, we might, on a horizontal, we might call that part the human ego, right? And the human ego is what we're aware of, and it helps us function in the day-to-day. Well, there's other parts to the human psyche.
So it's how we know ourselves really right now, is how we perceive ourselves in this land, in this earth.
Yeah, exactly.
This ego is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. And what's missing here, and I probably won't talk about it too much today unless there's time, is that there's actually a vertical axis too, and above might be what we would call spirit or oneness, or the non-dual, suchness, nothing, depending on your spiritual tradition. It's something about you that is true about everyone, that everyone can access this. It's kind of a great unitive consciousness. And then below the map here, below the horizontal, is what we would call soul. What's truly unique about your own unique identity in the world. It's why you were born, to bring a unique gift to the world. And I'll leave explication of that to Nate Bacon in the future.
Yeah, we will have him sharing some things about that. Thank you.
Yeah. So in some sense, this map doesn't look whole because it doesn't have those two other components. So it's actually a three-dimensional map, but it's hard to represent that on a book. But to leave those two out would actually to leave out part of our wholeness, actually. And my sense is that's why some people feel lost, because they don't have access to this connection to spirit, nor have they encountered their unique identity of their soul, of what their soul wants to bring in the world. So that's part of what's missing in Western culture, and one thing that can be helpful for us to understand, what can we cultivate? How can we move toward to it? What I want to focus on here first is on the outer wheel here, on those four terms in the four directions. That outer circle is what we call our wholeness, or the four facets of wholeness. Facets being kind of like a diamond, right? They all belong. A diamond's not really a diamond unless it has four facets. something like that.
I
And
didn't know that.
yeah. And the inner circle here is what we would call our protector parts, our complexes, if you're a psychologist, and subpersonalities. I like to use the word protector parts, actually, because it sounds less negative toward them, and they actually
Yeah.
serve a big function. But for most people, I would say in our culture, this is who they think they are. They think,
Okay.
yeah, they have these inner critical voices, these loyal soldier voices. They have these other voices of all the wounds that they've experienced in their life from their parents and education and partners and strangers and relatives and self-inflicted as well. They have these other parts as well, I might call addictions or escapists, to substances and technology and work, other things we can talk about that. And then there's these other part of ourselves that like we know about and they're just kind of hideous. We wish we didn't have them. So most people think that that's who they are, this inner circle. I'm a conglomeration of these pieces that don't really fit together. And that doesn't really feel good to go in the world as. This is what most people go seeking treatment for when in a physician's office or psychiatrist or psychologist or counselors or spiritual pastors, something like that. They're going to seek counseling for these types of issues, expecting that other person to help them feel better about it. And what's really revolutionary about this model is that on this outer circle, and these are archetypes, let me point that out. Archetypes, kind of using what Carl Jung took again, is these are energies, symbols, ways of being in the world that we have access to. And in our understanding in this map, these are the ways that when we feel like we're in our nurturing generative adult, we're in our wholeness. And I'll define that in a little bit. And we're feeling innocent sage, sacred fool, trickster, we're feeling a part of our wholeness. This wild indigenous one and these other ones, these are all part of our innate human wholeness. Now, I'll point out something else about the map here that's not listed here on the screen or the paper, is that our innate human wholeness is associated with seasons, time of day, and what we call a way or a window of knowing, right? So let's go to the east here on the map, right? East is spring, at least in cultures that have lots of seasons. I'm not sure if all parts of Colombia have those kinds of seasons. East is spring. It's a time for newness. It's a time for innocence, right? It's a time for seeing the big picture as well. And it's also associated with morning.
Mm-hmm.
So the east is associated with morning, sunrise. And in the east, what we have here are these, especially the innocent sage, these archetypes, which is like everything can begin again. That's what the innocent says. I'm not broken. I'm open to anything new. And the sage is like everything belongs. I can see that everything belongs, no matter how challenging it could all have some wisdom and can belong here. And then I'll kind of clarify here that the window of knowing here is kind of being present centered and in one's senses.
Okay.
Right? So this is kind of like a mindful state where I'm present, I'm aware of everything, but I'm using all my senses, including my sight, my senses, my skin sense, my smell, taste, my gut sense. When we're in that kind of place, we're in a facet of our wholeness, which feels quite different than if you're trying to escape or numb something out, which is the internal part, the escapist or addict. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's one part.
A lot.
Okay. Okay.
A lot of information. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a lot. And we'll just say in the north, the nurturing generative has a couple of qualities. Nurturing is more like the feminine quality that's tending what is, even though men and women can tend all that is. And the generative quality is they can bring things new into the world. Historically seen as a masculine quality, but also all-bodied people have that kind of quality. And the window of knowing here is what we call heart-centered thinking. Heart-centered thinking. It's thinking not really from one's head about me or my people or about profit. It's more about what's best for the collective?
Okay.
What's best for the collective, right? And what's best for the future? Like if we think like a lot of indigenous people, like if the decisions we make now better serve 7 generations forward, that kind of thinking, not just the present profit motive. And if you go across the wheel here, or sorry, this map here, you see this archetype called the Wild Indigenous One, right? And the wild means self-willed. Indigenous means knows that they belong to themselves and to community and to earth. And they're an expert in kind of knowing and experiencing their own bodies and their emotion. And that's a pretty rarity, to be honest with you, for people in North America, especially men, to kind of be wise about their emotions and know what they mean and where they live in their body and to fully feel them. We're really cut off from that in North America, at least.
Well, it's almost the same thing here.
Same thing there. Okay.
Mm.
And then there on the west, if you go to the left side of the diagram here, we have the west, which we associate with, I don't know, dusk and autumn and things ending, but it also gets pretty mysterious. And this was maybe part of the work for those of you that have read Carl Jung or understand depth psychology, is that there's something mysterious about each one of us, right? That we have, there are traditional egos that's more about working and loving, have a hard time comprehending, but there's a part of our psyche here that's part of our wholeness that we all long for. And the way of knowing, or the window of knowing here, we call it the deep imaginal, right? So we all know what imagination is, right? We use it every day, hopefully. And we also, some of us may have gone on like guided imagery journeys where someone might be speaking softly like this, saying, invited you to go to a beautiful beach with a waterfall and just to relax and feel the sun on your body, something like that. Those are nice. But then there's this also this other part of our psyche that's called the deep imaginal that comes almost without the ego without the ego wanting it to. But it's a really important part of ourselves. And we experience it every night when we dream, actually. But dreaming has got a bad rap in science. You know, dreaming for a long time by neurology has been seen as a way to encode memory. But it's our understanding and most indigenous people's understanding, this is an important aspect of our psyche that helps us experience a more mysterious part of ourselves and part of our world. And there's some archetypes there that are a little bit complicated, and I probably won't spend too much time on them, but they're meant to guide us to our deepest creativity and our deepest identity and to make us feel whole. And it really brings out more enchantment in the world, something like that. So this map we find helpful, and we find it helpful primarily as guides, but individuals find it helpful too. But the way we work at Animas is we invite people out on particular types of wanders in nature to cultivate aspects of this work.
Wow.
So that's part of the praxis of this work. Like, so one of the walks that we offer to maybe cultivate the East is to walk as the innocent, praising the world in the dawn. So we might invite people to wake up, and the first thing they do, even before coffee or checking hopefully their cell phone, is that they would go out looking at the world as if it were brand new and speaking out loud to the beings that they find and telling them how beautiful they are and how unique they are. That changes the way that you experience yourself and the way you participate in the world. And we have other walks, yeah, and the same thing for the other directions too. Like the Wild Indigenous One, it's the same thing. You might go out to have a wander where you know that you belong. And you might be in conversation with every being out there, actually. And you might even tell them how you belong and you're longing to belong further, and tell them how you don't belong. So part of it is when we change our way of kind of getting out of our heads, might be part of it, getting into these particular aspects or parts of our psyche and interacting with the world as it is, we begin to cultivate our wholeness. We begin to move into this archetype more further and more completely. And we're also opening these other ways of knowing besides thinking. And when people do these types of wanders, especially repetitively, they become quite altered and they become quite enchanted with the world. And they have a better sense of what I'm talking about. It's kind of hard just to talk about it from a map without really going in depth. It's more about participating in some of these kinds of ways of being in the world.
I know
It's kind of
it's
like,
quite different.
also, I'll just kind of hit I'll briefly on the West here. To have someone speak their dream, well, that's a mystery. What happens in a dream is quite a mystery, actually. And most of us try and interpret our dreams by making them make sense or looking at a book or something like that. But the purpose of a dream is actually to bring you into a greater consciousness. It's why people do psychedelics. They're looking for this aspect of their psyche that helps them bring to some sort of mystical consciousness and a deeper connection with earth and with spirit and with themselves and things like that. And we don't use these types of medicines. You don't have to. They do work. But we use different kinds of practices here. One of is dream work. Another one is called deep imaginal journeying, where someone will be playing a drum and offering you to kind of go into a very relaxed state of consciousness and then ask something to come from their deep imagination. And what comes from the deep imagination is always a surprise and always unique.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, todos estos aspectos que estás mencionando del wholeness que señala el mapa, ¿son importantes en nosotros? ¿Todos ellos se cultivan? ¿Es posible que uno trabaje en ellos? So, Brian, is it possible to work on all these aspects of our wholeness that you are showing us in the map? And do they have different levels on us, or do we have to find like an equilibrium about them, or how is it? How does it work?
Well, it might be partly like this. To be a thinker in Western culture is not really a threat to Western culture. Right? So you can think and participate, and that's usually what our educational systems want us to do, is just to think, dissect, analyze. When we become present to things and we can feel things fully and in our body, and we have access to our imagination, we might not live the same way we had before. So I'm getting a little off track from your question here, but hopefully you can see the connection there. So part of it is we can step into our innate wholeness here. And there's ways that we can kind of practice these things. And usually what we found helpful at Animas is cultivating the windows of knowing, or these archetypes that are most suppressed, right? And the ones that are most suppressed, at least in North America and Europe, are the one in the South and the one in the West.
In the West,
right? Especially for men. If for men to be in their bodies and their emotion, historically that's been seen as a bit taboo and a bit effeminate, actually. Right? And we even have connotations for these words, like the West in Western culture might have been seen as the occult, right? The occult, and associated with witchcraft and given a negative connotation that women who know the herbs of their place and are connected to the mysteries are dangerous. Well, they were pretty dangerous to a white male Christianity. And that's why they were summarily killed by the thousands and thousands in Western culture, Western European culture. So it's important, in a sense, to have access to all four windows of knowing and all these archetypes so that we feel whole. We feel less out of balance. And I have to be honest with you, the first Animas program I did, I had no idea some of the emotions that were waiting for me to experience. But I had put a cap on many of them. And grief, joy, ecstasy, eroticism, a lot of them had a cap on them, or a lid. And the same thing with this West facet. I had no idea the world could be so mysterious and enchanting. And the moment I experienced it, I just wanted more. I wanted more. I wanted more so much that I did a couple other programs with Animas, and then I left my job. Actually, I left my professorship. And then I left the United States and I lived in Costa Rica for 2 years while I retrained. There was something so important about finding my wholeness. And the other part here, which I didn't mention, maybe we can head into, is healing these other parts of myself. So for me, it was really finding access to these different parts of wholeness and then healing these other fragmented or protected parts of myself. So it's really important to focus on not necessarily the one that you're strong in. Like all of us are probably strong in one of these directions or one of these facets of wholeness or one of these windows of knowing. But there are other ways that we can cultivate as well that they kind of work together too. The more we cultivate all four, the more they work together, make us more resilient, balanced, creative, a full participant in life, something like that.
Brian, digamos como que para las personas de la cultura como la colombiana y también la americana, es como fácil caer en la tentación o en la idea de pensar que hay malas emociones. Nos han enseñado a suprimir muchas de las emociones que tenemos o que sentimos y a calificarlas como de inadecuadas, a suprimirlas realmente, casi que a meterlas entre un cajón y botarlos por allá en una esquina. For you, Brian, are there such a thing as bad emotions we have to suppress or avoid or control?
Well, that's why they make all the psychiatric drugs. So, no, actually. From a perspective maybe of healing someone else, there might be bad emotions, right? And there might be emotions that we fall into that probably don't help us feel whole or stay in relationship with each other, including ourselves, very well. These might be the emotions of what we might call the ones on that south map here, partly the wounded child, right? So the wounded child maybe primarily acts from fear or anger, actually, and that's usually not the best place to act from in relationship. There's healthy anger and then there's wounded anger, right?
Okay.
And so in many perspectives, if someone is living in this archetype again of the wild indigenous one, every emotion belongs and they know where they live. Actually, they know where they live in their body and they're able to kind of be present to the emotions without reacting and kind of just feel into it and they become pretty emotionally intelligent. Kind of like once I know something's off, then I can pay attention to it. And then I can kind of recognize where it lives in my body. And then I get a sense of what the emotion is and maybe what precipitated it, an interaction, something like that. But rather than reacting again from fear or anger, I can kind of slow down and go to a place of meaning like, okay, here's this emotion related to this event that might have happened. And what emotions tell us is like, they tell us, this is what I value, actually. So when I get really excited, it's because I value something that's happening there. If I get really curious, it's because there's something novel here and important for me. Or if I'm really sad, it's because I'm separated or had an expectation that's lost, something like that. It helps me understand what I value. And then I can choose how to act or not. So in a certain sense, when we're acting from this wild indigenous one and in our bodies and our emotion, we're more likely to be proactive and less likely to be reactive. And we also can decide what's the best way or to discern what's the best way to act on an emotion. And that's pretty different than the way most people act in Western culture and certainly in Western politics.
Absolutely. Wow, how interesting. Viendo el mapa, y no sé si lo podríamos volver a poner allí, de esas partes fragmentadas del whole, pues no sé, como que mirándolas ahí puedo verme representada en muchas de ellas, puedo sentirme, hasta me dan ganas un poco como de esconderlas, como un poquitico de pena de mostrar como que las tengo, ¿no? ¿Cómo entender esas partes fragmentadas de uno? ¿Cómo relacionarnos con ellas más exactamente? So, Brian, I can see in the map many of those fragmented parts in me, and they make me feel ashamed a little bit. I wish I could hide them or take them out of me.
Sure.
So how can we relate to those parts of us that we don't like or that we don't even know that exist on us?
Sure, that's a great question. And it's maybe one of the unique features about this map. It's also somewhat related to, for those of you who are therapists, it's slightly related to like what's known as internal family systems from Richard Schwartz. In certain ways, this is why I like the term protector parts, right? Protector parts sounds much better than fragments or subpersonalities or complexes, because in a sense, if we're moving toward wholeness and we say that everything belongs, even these parts belong, even though we're not necessarily calling them wholeness on the outer circle, right? So it happens that we're made in such a way that we have such a long developmental period till we become an adult, that our psyche is kind of wound and designed in a certain way to protect us from further wounding. Like all of us get wounded by interactions with people, whether it's our parents or siblings or grandparents or teachers or strangers or whatever. So all of us have the capacity to get wounded, and that's because we're vulnerable to it. And what happens when we get wounded then is we develop compensatory strategies to help us survive and read the environment so we get wounded less. And so when we get wounded, it doesn't feel good, but our psyche has developed a way, it's kind of like an inner voice. Here it's labeled as the loyal soldier that tells you there's a situation coming up that you've been in before. I'd recommend you not do what you did last time. Because that ended up in a spanking, a beating, being shamed, shunned, who knows, whatever it was, or even ostracized. So then we learn, almost really before we have maybe episodic memory, we learn what's safe to bring into our families and our educational and religious systems. And we develop these voices to say, I wouldn't go there. That's too big. That's too wild. And that's too, you put in the phrase there. So the loyal soldiers are actually really important because these inner voices, does everyone here know what I mean by inner critic? Is there anyone maybe on the call who doesn't have an inner critic saying, oh, you're not capable of doing that, or other people are, but not you, or it's probably going to fail, right? I have those. We all have them. And they're there to protect us in a certain way from criticism or ostracism or shame. And they keep us small when we need to be small. So
that is a beautiful sentence. Keep us small. Wow. Yeah.
And they keep us small to protect us when we're not independent yet, right? So we need these strategies. We call them, all of these inner circle strategies, childhood survival strategies, because we need them to belong to our families and our educational systems. And we need them especially because our systems aren't that healthy. So we have these voices to keep us small, and they're there to protect us from getting further wounded. Sometimes we do get wounded anyhow. And if we get so overwhelmed, well, that's when we need these strategies on the east of the escapist or addict. Like, for an example, one escape addict, or one activity of the escapist, for those of you who have maybe studied psychology or psychiatry and know about trauma, is the dissociation phenomenon. We actually dissociate. We do not remember. We're not fully inhabiting our bodies. We're not encoding the emotion or the memory of the event into our ego. But we also have other strategies where we just walk away from things if they're too difficult, right? Or we begin to participate in an addiction to kind of decrease the pain of the wound, whether it be alcohol, drugs, sex, video gaming, work, something like that. All of those can kind of protect us from the actual feeling of being wounded. So again, all of these strategies work to protect the part of our young child, our inner child, you might say. And they work until they don't work. And that typically is after we've left home. And then we realize, wow, I feel kind of small and constricted. And I don't like this voice that says, you can't do that, because I feel like I really want to do that. But I have this voice that does that. And I might have this addiction to whatever, and I don't really feel good about it. I don't tell others about it, but it's still serving a function in a certain way. It's at that moment, in a certain way, that the war of childhood is over, and it's time to begin cultivating wholeness, and then what we call self-healing. So is it okay if I talk about self-healing?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
Es como esa autocuración de la que estás hablando, sí.
yeah, so this is another unique kind of finding of Bill and the Animas Valley Institute is that part of our psyche is maybe excels in healing other parts of our psyche. And it's actually the ones across the map that are experts at it. So, for example, we have these loyal soldier inner critic voices that tell us if you do that, people might criticize you or kick you out and you won't belong anymore. Well, the one that knows about belonging is this wild indigenous one. I said, maybe 20 minutes ago, this one knows how to belong. Everything belongs. They belong to earth. The emotions belong. I belong in my body. When I'm in that wild indigenous one, I don't really care what others think about me, to be honest with you, because I know I belong. I'm really authentic, right? So these aspects across our psyche and wholeness can heal these fragmented ones. It's the
Mm,
same thing with the wounded child. When I'm feeling wounded, what I really need is a nurturing generative adult. And I can talk to myself and say, wow, that thing that your sister or your partner or your a boss did to you, that really hurt. Oh my God, I feel the same way you did too, kind of as you would to a child, right? So we have the ability to do this for ourselves, actually, to talk us into our feelings and to hold
mm,
us so
mm.
that we don't feel the need to lash out or numb it out with an addiction, something like that. So there's this whole capacity of these facets of wholeness, especially emphasizing one particular facet to support our healing of these protector parts.
Mm. Brian, también mirando un poco aquí como a este mapa, no sé si coincidas un poco, pero hablábamos de la dificultad que hay en las culturas un poco como de cultivar ese sur y ese oeste, ¿no? Ese Wild Indigenous y ese Mystery, digámoslo así. Estaba pensando si eso no es un poco también como relacionándolo con lo que decías de que particularmente para los hombres es difícil el cultivar estos dos aspectos del wholeness, porque podría sentirse algo así como, de cierta manera, como atado a esas brujas o a esas maneras femeninas de manejar o de relacionarse con el mundo desde el misterio. Y como que nos da un poco de miedo aceptar ese misterio y nos impedimos de entrar allí. ¿Tú dirías que de alguna manera ese femenino ha estado siendo a lo largo de estos últimos años, de esta historia nuestra un poco guiada desde la voz de lo masculino, como que hemos escondido eso femenino, como que lo hemos, como que le tenemos cierto miedo y lo despreciamos un poco como parte de nuestra formación? So, Brian, do you agree if we say that the sacred feminine has been a little bit or violently suppressed from our cultures?
Of course. Yeah, I would say that the Western culture has suppressed and been frightened of, projected evil upon, things that are dark, things that are feminine, and things that are indigenous. I'd say that might be part of the legacy of Western culture, is that anything that is different than that is to be feared, actually, and to be shamed and to be destroyed in a certain way. We see that with what happened with indigenous peoples. We see that in terms of patriarchy, and we see that in terms of capitalism with what it's done to the planet. So definitely the sacred feminine or the erotic feminine or the mysterious feminine is feared, often by, we'll just say, the masculine in its wounding, the masculine in its protected parts. The masculine in its wholeness loves the sacred feminine, loves the dark, loves the indigenous, is drawn to it, knows that it's part of the whole, and it's part that might be missing from them. But the one in the wounded part, or what Bill would also call patho-adolescent masculine, is terrified and threatened by it and wants to destroy it. That's at least my understanding.
Mm. Interesting. Bueno, es como clara en la forma en que vamos desarrollándonos como de adultos que se requiere un montón de trabajo personal y es algo que tampoco está como muy en nuestra cultura, ¿no? El pensar que estamos desarrollándonos y que hay que prepararnos y que hay que trabajar a nivel personal para ser esas mejores personas y un poco para tener vidas más plenas y para poder darle sentido a nuestras propias existencias. La pregunta aquí sería, uno arranca este trabajo y hay un momento en el cual se siente como que ya está listo en ese wholeness, en esa integridad para encontrarse con el mundo o cómo es eso. So, Brian, in working in our wholeness, is there a moment when you can say, yes, I got it. Now I am a whole. I am ready. Or how does it work?
In times it's that way. And you might have noticed on the map in the north, there's also a voice called the inner flatterer, which might say, hey, buddy, you got it. You're in your wholeness. And then you realize that you're not, right? So part of the way we work at Animas is we begin on our programs and the way the book is set up was we begin cultivating them individually, these different directions, these different facets, these different windows of knowing. And then we have other practices where we're bringing them all together so that they is like the diamond of the self, so that you're present and in your senses, right? And you're in your body and in your emotion and you're in imagination and you're in your heart thinking about what's best for the planet and for the future ones and those that have little. When you're acting from that place, you're in wholeness. So there are moments when I know I'm in my wholeness, right? And then there's moments when I fall out. Right. And it used to be when I would fall, I'd get really mad at myself and that inner critic would kick in. See, I'm like, this doesn't work. Why are you wasting your time with this? Right. And then it's just like, oh, I've been, and sometimes this happens too. We call it getting hijacked by a protector part where you might get hijacked by one and then it's hard to get out of it until someone says, I wonder what's going on with you. And then you realize, oh, I'm not in my wholeness. Let me return. Actually, and you might have to take some space, and I usually go outside into nature and kind of sense what's happening here and then return again to these archetypes, to these windows of knowing, and as best I can. So there are times when you're in their wholeness, and I guess wholeness might be also a moving stick, as we say in English. Like there's always more wholeness available, right? Always
There's
more and more wholeness.
More. So it's an
Always
endless
more.
process.
It is. I think we're so vast and we live currently so small that we don't know. And we may be even afraid of our own wholeness because it might change the way we live or how people see us or our relationships. It did for me, right? But when we're living in our wholeness, we're actually participating in the uniqueness of who we are and our unique place in our own watershed and our unique calling in a certain way. And there's times when we fall out. And so sometimes, obviously, in life, you come across something and you realize, oh, I still have a wound there. And that got triggered the other day and I acted from that. I need to go understand that a little better and work with that one, get to understand it and begin to self-heal that. So I typically journal about the episode that happened, how it reminded me maybe of a previous episode in my life that's making me recurrent. And then I begin to heal that and to make reparations if I've wounded someone in return, actually, something like that. So in some ways, one of the phrases Bill like is the work is never done, right? Because if the work would be done, then we'd probably get filled with pride and arrogance, which means it's really not done. There's more and more to go. Yeah.
Part of a mystery.
It is.
Brian.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A mí me sorprende mucho siempre en el trabajo con Animas Valley que exista esta capacidad de entrar en contacto con el misterio. ¿Por qué no nos hablas un poco más acerca de esa conexión con el misterio y qué es eso que como humanos encontramos allí? So the question would be, Brian, Animas Valley is always speaking about this mystery and getting in touch with this mystery. So could you a little bit explore for us a little bit more on that mystery? How is it to connect with it, and why would you do that?
Yeah, connect with the mystery. Well, because it's part of reality. That would be one reason you'd want to connect with mystery, right? Every culture has some sort of religion, and every religion is based on some mystical experience that everyone can have or one person had. And a lot of like monotheistic religions are organized around a particular mystical experience that the founder had, even though they didn't want to be founders, right? Of some kind of conversation with Earth or with mystery or God that kind of was different than what everybody else was experiencing, right? So in the evolution maybe of man, it's got to the point where it's my understanding that we can say maybe what Jesus said: I and the Father are one. That's a type of mystical consciousness. I am also part of the Godhead, right? But if you were raised in Western Europe, from 800 to 2000, they might have stoned you for saying something like that. Only Jesus could say that, right? And so the mystics were kind of pushed aside. And it's the same thing that you can also say that I belong to Earth, right? Which people might say, well, that sounds like pantheism or animism, and that's not Christian, so that's pagan, right? Or heathenism or something like that. But it's possible, and it's actually what so many religions are missing, are access to these other places of connection with reality, right? So part of, again, the connection with reality is connection to Earth and connection to ourselves and to each other. But these other aspects of connection are to mystery, which might have maybe two components to it. One I've already identified, it is spirit, which are done through maybe more traditional Eastern practices, like of Buddhism and certain aspects of Hinduism and centering prayer in Christianity. But the other aspect of mystery is the mystery of our own being. Actually, part of the mystery of our own being is really experienced in this West facet of ourselves, right? The West facet. And, maybe I'll share an example that might be even more helpful.
Yes, please, go ahead.
So this came in a dream when I was, I don't know, maybe 12 years ago in my life. And in the dream, I'm in a body of water and it's night. And I'm floating there and I'm kind of like, what am I doing here? And then across the water, I see this beautiful woman coming toward me. And in the dream, I recognize her as this woman I fell in love with when I was 21, who did not fall in love with me. So it was a bit of an unrequited love in the world, but here she is. And in the dream, I'm like, oh, I wonder if she's divorced now. Maybe she's interested in me now, right? And as she comes closer and closer, I can just feel kind of the luminous quality of her body in the water, and it's being reflected by the moon, and everything's becoming pretty magical. And the waters begin to feel warm and electrical. And then all of a sudden she moves forward and she wraps her arms and legs around me, and it's like, and I was just like, and I was like so alive. Like I've never felt more alive. Like every chakra, you would say, was open and fully aroused, and just like I felt loved and wild and whole, and it was an unbelievable experience. And then she separated from me in the dream and she swam to the edge of the pool. And after that experience, I'm following her. So I follow her and she climbs up the bank and I follow her kind of through this jungle in this forest. And eventually she ends up at this huge tree, kind of like a world tree, like Yggdrasil in Norse mythology, or if you've seen that tree in the movie Avatar, that kind of tree.
Wow.
She goes up in this tree and she introduces me to her mother, which is Grandmother Earth. And then she wanders further up the tree, and then I'm beginning to follow her up, and I wake up. And at that moment, a voice in my dream says, "This is your anima." And I was just like, what the hell was that? Right? I'd never even heard the word anima before. But this is what Jung called part of the collective unconscious. There's this unique archetype in each one of us, and specifically unique for each human. There's a being or a quality that feels like the guide to soul. And when I was 21, I projected this on this woman, thinking she was the answer because it was an inner part of my psyche, and that's how I discovered it. But I was confused. And later I realized, oh, this is a part of my own psyche. And she's the one that makes me feel whole and guides me to the deepest mystery of who I am, actually.
Mm.
So that's the importance primarily of the imaginal. It's in the
Mm.
imaginal that we can really experience the deep mystery of the psyche. It's the
Mm.
unconscious, the collective unconscious, and the personal unconsciousness, and maybe even the ancestral unconsciousness. And it's mysterious down there. It's very
Mm.
mystery. It's
It
wonderful.
is indeed.
It's enchanting, as you heard from that. And the more you feel it, the more you want to follow, something like that. So that's kind of how I experience a bit of the mystery. So that's a part of it. Maybe the opener for many people is having a big dream that changes their life, or a big experience with ayahuasca or psilocybin, or an encounter in nature that just is undeniable, or the voice from God, something like that.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a mystery. And that's meant
Bien,
to be
qué buen
followed.
ejemplo.
Mhm.
Muy interesante ese episodio de tu vida en conexión con el misterio. Pero yo quiero seguir como indagando un poco sobre ese tema del misterio. Y hemos hablado aquí a lo largo de toda esta noche mucho de esa conexión de uno con uno mismo hacia el interior y también de uno con los otros humanos. Pero hay un mundo más que humano, del que Animas Valley es bastante consciente y con el cual trabaja mucho dentro de ese misterio. So, la pregunta sería, Brian, what is exactly the connection between our own individual well-being and maturity and that of the planet as a living being, the home for a profound mystery of this unique phenomena called life? And how is that relationship of the human being with all these other beings in our existence that make this mystery so worth living?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a big question. I guess part of the answer would be it's reciprocal. Like when the earth is healthy, it's more likely we're going to be healthy. Right? So that's one of the challenges right now, is we've destroyed so many of the earth life systems and destroyed so many of the large mammals, and we poison the waters and the air so frequently. The variety of creatures and the thriving of them and the fecundity of the earth is compromised, which obviously puts us in jeopardy, and it puts every other being in jeopardy. So it kind of comes to this point where it might be that we really have to go through this awakening. Actually, part of is moving into our wholeness. Part of it's just humbling ourselves, and this is maybe also part of getting out of what we would call anthropocentrism and egocentrism.
Yeah.
Right? Anthropocentrism being that the human animal is the one that deserves everything on the planet. The focus on us rather than on every being and everything living in the ecosystem. That maybe is a big part of our wholeness and a part of our humbling, is that because we've thought that we were only creature in the garden, we've destroyed the garden in a certain way. So that's maybe on a species level. And then on the personal level, it's getting out of egocentrism, of doing just what usually our protector parts or our complexes want us to do. Kind of living these small ways, which are mostly about, I don't know, profit and protection and safety and different things like that, rather than looking at the whole of our ecosystem and the whole of the world, the whole of Gaia, something like that. And that's another important shift. And an important part of that is that one facet of wholeness, this wild indigenous one. There's something that we've discovered, which Nate will probably cover in a couple weeks more at length, but I'll just mention it here. For many individuals who begin this work of wholeness and kind of heading toward connection with nature, they often go through an experience we might call an eco-awakening, where they have an experience, and this happens also in many other ways. It can happen in meditation, it can happen on psychedelics. People have a sense that my primary place of belonging isn't actually my human community or my human identity or even human culture. It's not that I'm a physician, that's not most important, or that I'm a Christian, or that I'm a carpenter, or that I'm a dancer, or a son, or a father. It's that I'm a member of Earth, actually. And that's a very unique developmental step in Western culture. It's an artifact, actually, from being raised in Western culture. People raised in nature-based cultures don't go through this step. They never lose their connection to nature. But that's an important one. And part of it is cultivating our human wholeness. We need to be present in our senses, in our bodies, in our emotion, in our belonging, in our imaginations, and in our hearts. And the more that we're in that place and the more we spend time in nature, the more we come to know that we belong to nature, and we're willing to kind of be more of an environmentalist or an ecologist, or thinking about the greater whole about all our actions. We begin to consider what's really important for the earth or for our community or for our water, our watershed, our rivers, rather than what's already there, something like that. So I'd say they go back and forth, and a lot of it, part of it's challenging. Like if there were emotions that were bad, here's an example. It doesn't feel good to be present to what's happening to Earth. It leads to a lot of grief and sadness for people. So if grief is a bad emotion, you won't understand what's going on. But if grief, in a sense, is part of reality and you need to feel it, that might motivate you and move you more toward a deeper connection with Earth in action, towards saving the Earth for all the beings, but also for the future humans.
Parece, Brian, que un poco lo que hemos conversado a lo largo de toda esta noche tiene mucho que ver con estar presentes, sintientes, receptivos en la vida, en cada instante. Poder estar presentes, poder no actuar como en el automático, sino estar absolutamente presentes, siendo tocados por lo que viene de afuera. Ha sido una conversación profunda, llena de información, llena de descubrimientos que seguramente nos van a dejar pensando mucho tiempo y que también nos hacen sentir mucha gratitud por la posibilidad de acercarnos a ese trabajo de Animas Valley aquí en Colombia. Quisiéramos como tomarnos unos 3 o 4 minuticos para que nuestro público pueda escribir en el chat esas preguntas que tiene palpitando en este momento después de todo esto que han escuchado, y que podamos darle tiempo y voz a ellos para que participen de esta conversación y nos nutran con lo que traen. Así es que la invitación un poco en este momento es a todas nuestras, en este momento tenemos 53 personas en el chat. Sería maravilloso poder empezar a ver en ese chat esas preguntas que les suscita esta conferencia, esta conversacioncita, y se las traducimos a él y completamos pues este gran inicio de las conversaciones profundas de Efecto Mariposa. Así es que bienvenidas las preguntas en este chat. And we're going to open our chat for the questions for the public. Thank you very much for everything that we have shared here, that you have shared with us. And the invitation is to listen to the public. And listen to the public and see what the questions are. Well, we have here the first one, and it says, do you think the more afraid we are of relating to mystery, the more it appears to our psyches in unwanted forms? Is it possible to refine this relationship? Wonderful. Thank you very much, Lina.
Yeah, great question, Lena. I'd say that's true for every aspect of our wholeness. Actually, the more we're afraid of part of it, the more it shows up. Well, it shows up kind of in an immature form, something like that. I'll kind of give an example here. One thing I didn't talk about on that nature-based map of the human psyche is the thing called the shadow. And that's in the West, it's one of our protector parts, and it keeps a lot of our gold and our sinister aspects from us. And Carl Jung said something similar to your question here. That which we suppress or repress shows up as a devil, basically. So it shows up in an aspect of our life when we're not really ready for it. It might get us into trouble. For example, if you happen to be a priest who suppresses your body and your sexuality, it might show up in sexual abuse, right? Sex is a normal thing for every human, but when we suppress something, it shows up in an unwanted form, right? So this is one of the challenges, obviously, with a lot of some traditional teachings. But it's the same thing with any aspect of our psyche. It can show up in an unwanted form. Good question. I hope that's a response.
Very, very good one. There's another one here from Marcela Arango. And it says, me surge una pregunta, ver y sentir y estar presente en lo que le está pasando a la vida me lleva al duelo. ¿Cómo sentir ese duelo y al mismo tiempo encontrar energía para seguir adelante, para encontrar la belleza en medio de tanta confusión? So I'm going to try to translate it to you, Brian. And Marcela says, she's got this question. Be able to see and to feel and to be present in whatever is going on in our lives is driving me to grief. How can I feel this grief and at the same time find the energy to go ahead and to find the beauty that is in, that is in all this confusion?
Right. That's a great question. Yeah, I feel similarly, actually, from time to time, and I often ask myself that. Well, one thing that's kind of just coming to me is to do it in community, right? One thing we've lost are grief rituals in community. Like all healthy cultures have grief rituals in community. I've been to one, and I'm 55 years old, and I live in a Western nation, and that's a problem. So sometimes grief rituals in community can be of assistance. It helps people feel less separated from those who are also feeling it. So that's one possibility. The other kind of thing here might be to even fuel your longing to know what's your role here. What's your role here and what's happening? Something like that. So here's maybe a walk or an invitation for you, right? It might be to go out and to step across a threshold and just to wander into a place. Maybe it's first a place of kind of place that feels whole, actually, and just to feel that and to feel the wholeness of earth and the wholeness of that natural place, and to just kind of be there with it. And you might praise it, as I already have before, and you might ask permission to touch and to talk to each of the beings there, and to feel what's there, and just to kind of feel your belonging there. And then you might actually go to a place that feels, I guess the English word is desecrated. I don't know if that translates into Spanish. Desecrated, a place that's been mined or the forest cut down, and to really be there and to feel it, and to tell the place what you understand has happened to it, actually. And to really grieve with the place. This used to be something like this, right? And you're doing this from your wholeness again, right? And it could also be that sometimes the challenge here is that because we've also done something, or something similar has been done to our own life in a certain way, that something important to us or some of our wildness has been polluted or cut down. So after a conversation with what you see about that place and grief about that place, you might tell that place about how you feel that way as well, right? And then you could feel, and maybe even the place mirrors something back, that, and it might mirror back something surprising, like, yes, that happened, but I will grow again, potentially, right? And you might have the same or similar conversation with the place as whole. You might go to this, I don't know, maybe it's a forest or maybe a meadow, and you just see how everything makes it whole. And you tell it what you understand about how it does its thing. And then you might tell it also how you are whole. And you might be surprised by what you discover.
Mhm. Marcela is saying, oh, thank you. There's another question here,
And
and it's
I have one idea that might, oh, sure.
go ahead.
Well, I had an idea that maybe we could take some of the wanders at the back of the Wild Mind chapters on wholeness and
Yeah,
translate those into Spanish and send them to the people listening. And then they could just go experiment on their own.
that is such a good idea.
Okay. I'll send you the wanders, and I'll let you guys translate them and send them out and see what happens. It'd be really
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. You know that we are still working on translating all
I know.
this information in Spanish.
Yes.
Okay, here goes. Here it goes. What is the role of nature in our own processes? Wait a minute. It got lost. Yeah. What is the role of nature in our own processes? And what is the relationship between the psyche of nature and the psyche of humans? Does nature have a psyche?
That's a great mysterious question. Um, the way I might answer it is what if there's really no difference between nature and psyche? Right? I'll just share this personal experience from the past week. I've been guiding a program here where I live in Southern California for 8 people. And the program was one of our entry programs, different from Wild Mind. But a woman came who has a lot of sacred medicine experience, a lot of psychedelic experience, and no experience in nature at all. And I would send her on a couple of wanders, and what would happen for her is whatever was happening in her psychedelic journey happened on the land. It's the same thing in a certain way. So, yeah, there's something mysterious about Earth and our own psyches, and maybe the Earth psyche, is that we're all kind of swimming in it at the same time, and we've made it all too small. We've made it all too small. And that goes to the deficit of our species and to our own lives, is when we understand what Earth is and that it's a mysterious, imaginative, well, the Earth is, think how imaginative the Earth is. The Earth has its own imagination. Look at all the creatures dreamt into existence. How did that happen? It's not just evolution, it's imagination, right? So the Earth herself has some kind of mystical imagination that even imagined us. And if it imagined us, then we're probably swimming in all of it with her and the whole cosmos, right? But again, it takes moving out of our traditional consciousness to experience this. And this is why it happens on some of these nature wanders and psychedelic experiences, other religious ecstatic experiences. We get of something, a sense or a whiff of something much grander and much more mysterious than what we experience every day.
Wow. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
There's here another question of Adri Pau. And she says, what things or activities can we do in regular day-to-day life to connect with our own archetypes and with the shadow?
Great question. Partly it's just remembering that you have them and then acting from that place, right? So here's an example. Um, one of the archetypes in the East was the sacred fool, right? The sacred fool doesn't care what anyone thinks about them. So you could act as crazy as you want, maybe around the people you love, and just see what that feels like. Just be a crazy fool. Right? It doesn't matter. It's all a cosmic joke to that one. Right? That really lightens the world up. I acted a lot that way as the trickster and the sacred fool during the pandemic because it lightens everything up. Right? Another possibility is to maybe if you have a garden, to really do it more intentionally from this wild indigenous one and to speak to the plants and send love to the plants and be curious about what their lives are. That's a way of accessing that part of the psyche again and that archetype. Yeah. So there's simple ways you can use your imagination and kind of play with them. Now, when it comes to the shadow, it's a little different, but I'll give you a couple of pointers here. The shadow, and let me define it first here. Shadow is everything that's true about you, but you would adamantly deny is true. Right? And usually we think of like negative things, like sinister things, like you're a killer, or you're a pedophile, or you're a land destroyer, or something. Well, all those things are probably true of all of us given circumstances. And it's also true that we suppress or we put in our unconscious our gold, that we're magnificent, eloquent speakers, that we can design incredible organizations that serve the world, that we're poets, that we're artists, that we're agents of cultural regeneration, because all of us are. So we hide a lot of our gold, we might call it, in the shadow as well, because it wouldn't have been tolerated when we were children, and maybe we weren't ready enough to live it into the world. So part of the thing about shadow is that we begin to project it, right? I gave an example of projection when I projected my anima, my beloved, onto this woman when I was 21, right? And I thought, oh, she's the one. Well, she was, but she's the inner one, not the outer one, right? And we project sinister and we project gold onto other people. So for you, Adrapal, and others who are curious about it, you might think right now of, is there a person that I have such quickly, usually it's a quickly projection, that they're just like the most amazing being ever, and I could never be like them. Just think about that for a second and see who comes to mind. It's likely that that's a projection of part of your own self too, part of your goal, that you might be called to be something kind of like them or in certain qualities, right? And sometimes we get this in emotional charges. Sometimes we get them in dreams as well. I've had multiple dreams where I've had golden figures, and I know I'm not like them. Bill Plotkin was one of them. So that's one way to kind of begin exploring the shadow, is to kind of track where you have a positive projection or a negative. That's also an important one. Like maybe there's a person or a type of person that you meet and you immediately have a very negative reaction to them. You just can't stand them. You don't want to be near them. Well, it might be that they're doing something that is dangerous to your own self-understanding. Now, it could be that you're just like them, but you haven't acknowledged that because that would threaten the way you see yourself. Or it could be that the quality that they have, you've mislabeled and actually is a quality that you need to bring into your life. For example, it's often on our programs that one person will get so tired of someone else who just apparently seems to be talking all the time. They just can't stand them. And it's because that person hasn't accessed their own authentic voice yet. And it would have been dangerous for them as a child to do that. And it's still even dangerous or a threat to them now. So they can't stand people who have access to their bold, authentic voice. That's a sign of a place for you to grow into, reclaiming part of your own shadow. I hope that's helpful.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Adrapal. There is another question. It comes from Abril, and she asks, what tools can we give children to maintain their wholeness in this fragmented world?
See, I got a couple answers here. One would be to cultivate our own wholeness as parents. It's really important, right? In the Bible, it says the sins of the father are, inflicted on the sons and the grandsons. And even though we don't like to believe it, we usually come out kind of like our parents after a while in some of our strategies, or we rebel against them, but it may not be into wholeness. So part of it as a parent, I have 15-year-old twin boys, and I've spent a lot of my time kind of cultivating my own wholeness so that the parts of myself that are wounded don't wound them. And I still wound them because I'm human. I'm not perfect. I'm whole. And I forgive myself and they forgive me, right? When I ask. So part of it is doing our own work. The other part of them is seeing them as whole already and becoming something unique in the world. And so part of that means helping them, and Nate will talk more about this too when he talks about rewilding childhood and soul-centric parenting, is giving them ample time in nature, unsupervised time in nature for those kids like 6 to 12. Not just hiking or whatever or not just going to the beach, but just giving them access to begin using their imagination and creativity. The other part of them is not really wanting them to be other than they're designed to be, right? It's hard for parents to not want to parent in a way so that they'll fit in and be successful. That's actually what most schools are designed for. They're not designed to help kids connect to nature and their inner nature and to help them uncover what's uniquely authentic in what they're drawn to. So that's part of it. The other part is really trying to limit access to technology, which is it's really hard here in America because everybody's, especially during the pandemic, this is how kids communicate. They're online playing games with each other, but trying to limit that, especially in younger children, especially kids up to age 4 really should have very limited access to technology. And even from 5 to 12, it should be limited in certain ways. So those are certain things that can be there. And part of it is choosing to live a different kind of lifestyle that might support an ecocentric childhood, that the family is not really participating as much in technological industrial growth society and with other families. And it's hard. I get it. It's hard. It's hard for us too, where we live. So those are some thoughts. There'll be a lot more thoughts, I'm sure, from Nate Bacon, who also has children, and they're a bit younger than mine. And one of his focuses on how do we kind of keep kids in their wholeness. Part of it is they are in their wholeness. And part of it is, as you'll be learning in the future, is they have unique developmental tasks. And the ones that most likely get suppressed are being connected to nature, connected to their imagination, connected to their bodies, their emotions, and just being present.
Wow. Super wow. Here we do have another question. It comes from Beatriz, and she says, we have talked a lot about wholeness, but can you please tell me in a short way what wholeness is?
Well, it's kind of like an ecology, that everything serves a purpose and belongs and is held in love, actually. That might be my definition of wholeness. Everything belongs and belongs in love and it serves a purpose. And I use kind of the example again of these protector parts. Maybe I didn't mention this before. Part of our work with these protector parts, these fragmented ones on the inner circle, is that they actually served us when we were children, actually. And sometimes they still serve us as adults. But part of self-healing is realizing they're part of your wholeness. They're part of your story. Not that you wished you didn't have them, but that you want to kind of mature out of them. But you want to know that you want to let them know that you love how they served you and bring them toward. It's the same kind of thing with regard to if we suppress something, does it come to bite us later? It's the same thing with our protector parts. We should be grateful we have loyal soldiers, grateful we have wounded children, grateful we have escapist and addict strategies because they served us until the point that we realize that they're keeping us too small and not authentic. And then we fall in love with them for how they served us. And we tell them, we're not going to choose to act from you, but I appreciate how you served me as I was maturing. For me, that's kind of psychic wholeness.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have another one, and it says, If you have a friend that is having hard times psychologically, how to accompany him or her for them to grow into their wholeness?
Well, part of it is reminding them that they might have their own wholeness, actually, and that whatever triggered the challenge right now is just a phase. They might have just been overwhelmed by a particular part, but you can even remind them that they have a wholeness. Other things that can be helpful are, again, spending time in nature on their own, but if they need assistance, bringing them out in nature. Nature is a huge remedy for all of our facets and many of our problems. There's really no deficit or no problem caused by going into nature, especially if you know what you're doing. So those are things that I might mention. And then I'll also mention that psychotherapy is helpful for some people. Right? There are really good psychotherapists who can do a lot of healing, and there's some that are onto this concept of wholeness too. So if you feel like the person's not, improving with what you're offering to them as a friend, then you might recommend something like that. I've benefited greatly from psychotherapy, to be honest with you. It got me a long way. It didn't get me into my own wholeness. That was a different paradigm that I'm talking about tonight. So everything's important, just like psychotherapy is part of our cultural wholeness. So it also belongs. But we need to know there's also other things as well that can help move us into our own wholeness.
Well, Brian, wow, such a dinner and such a feed for thought. Well, you are going to come here to Colombia and to start working with us on that. So how does it feel to work with this Colombian people? How is it for you to come down here and visit us?
Well, I'm really excited to come. I've never been to what they call South America. Actually, I've been to Costa Rica, as I've mentioned, but never further south. So I'm really curious about it. And I also mentioned there's a mystery here. I think I mentioned it to you guys on a call a couple of months ago, and I woke up with the word Magdalena. I didn't know what that was. And then I looked it up, and I was like, okay, Mary Magdalene, but also this river, I guess, which is a prominent river in your country. So there's something happening here, and I'm really excited to see what's going to evolve. And I'm so grateful to you all at Efecto Mariposa for reaching out to Animas and reaching out to me and bringing these people here together tonight. The world is fragmented. It's coming apart like a beautiful tapestry weaving that's just falling apart at the seams. And my sense is that all of us here on this call, we're here to help reweave the world back to its beauty and wholeness. So I'm really excited to come.
Great. There is another question here that is
okay.
coming here. So we were saying goodbye, but somebody is writing here, and I'm going to try to translate it. She says, I still have a doubt about the voice that is protecting us and is making us small. Mm-hmm. How to differentiate that voice? Because in an intensive I had in Colombia with Nate, I remember have talked about keeping us small, referring to actions that do not allow us to grow. But I don't remember talking about the times in which being small is to protect us.
Yeah. Well, as I understand the question, it might be again that part of it, when we have these voices, we have to discern, are they reading the environment accurately, or are these remnants from childhood, right? So we rarely do what we would call self-healing work with people under 18. They might still need their loyal soldiers to fit into their families and their schools, actually. But when childhood's over, and we still have the voice that's telling us we can't do that, you should not do that, you're not good enough, stay small, stay hidden, whatever they say, it might be that they're inaccurate. They're a legacy from childhood. And it's those that are the voices that we want to begin to thank and say, you served me. But I have a sense that I'm called to something a little bit bigger than what this voice has in mind. I love you. Thank you for offering your advice, but I'm going to step over and do that. We call that advanced loyal soldier work, doing something that even the loyal soldier says you shouldn't do. The loyal soldier wants to protect you from ridicule, shame, and failure and abandonment, but it also keeps us from living authentically our power into the world. So sometimes we have to do that. We have to go against exactly what the voice says. Kind of like me being here on the video here tonight. It's one of those times too. Like I had, like, who am I to, come on a call with all of you? But I have to get over it and say, well, this is what I'm called to do. I'm going to do my best. If it's a failure because of my inability to understand the question or the language or the culture, it'll hurt, but I hope it serves. So that's just like a personal example, and hopefully that can be an example for you as well.
Great. Great. So everybody, thank you very much for being with us tonight. And this first conversation was full of things, and this is really a beautiful way to start our deep conversations section in Efecto Mariposa. So Brian, thank you very much. And everybody here, please feel free to write us down. Yeah, to write us down or to raise any questions that you have. We will be in touch with you. And of course, we will be continuing in these conversations. We are going to have 2 more following the work of Animas Valley, and inviting you to get in touch with this language of Animas Valley, because we're going to be bringing beautiful courses here to work on that wholeness and on the shadow out and on the going and descending to our soul. So feel free to ask us how to get in contact or in touch with those books of Bill Plotkin and the work of Animas Valley. Brian, it has been a pleasure being with you. We usually sound our gun to end up these conversations and go out of this field. So everybody, please enjoy, think a lot, feel a lot about what you are hearing here, and have a good night.
I just want to say thank you to you, Ale, and to the whole team and to everyone who showed up here tonight. And for the group, I'd invite you to pay attention to your dream tonight. You might have a dream like I had, and that would probably change the world.
That would be great. That would be amazing. Thank you so much, Brian. And also thank you everybody on the Efecto Mariposa team for supporting this. The ones that had done the translation, the backup support, Aleja. Muchísimas gracias a todos. A las traductoras, a nuestro apoyo de soporte. Muchas gracias. Y bueno, Brian, qué delicia tenerte en este espacio. Una maravilla. Muchísimas gracias. Voy a tocar acá el gong y cerramos nuestra sesión.